"I told you can't play here. This is private property," she shrieked, dragging my daughter by the arm like she was a stray dog. I was inside for less than 5 minutes, just 5. And when I heard my daughter's screams from the backyard, I knew something was wrong, but I never expected to see that woman, Karen from the HOA board, grabbing my little girl and dragging her toward the old well near the fence. "Stop. That's my daughter," I shouted, running as fast as I could. But she didn't stop. She pushed her, my 5-year-old, forward, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the cold bricks, tears streaming down her face. And that witch? She just smiled. "You people don't belong here," Karen said without even looking back at me. "You bought this house illegally. I checked. It's fraud. She's trespassing." I was shaking, not with fear, but with something deeper. Rage. And something I hadn't felt in years, the kind of thing I trained myself to control. "You have 3 seconds to move away from her," I said, trying to keep my voice level. But she just laughed like I was the crazy one. "Or what? You'll call the cops?" "I am the cops around." "Here," she snapped. "HOA gave me full authority. You're done here." That's when I clicked the small button on my belt. Silent, fast, and all hell broke loose. The sound of a chopper ripped through the sky like a blade slicing the air. Karen flinched. My daughter screamed louder. The trees bent from the force as dust exploded around the backyard, and 4 soldiers, real ones, hit the ground running. What is this?" Karen gasped, stepping back from the well, but it was too late. I picked up my daughter and held her tight, and then I said the first thing that made her jaw actually drop. "You just tried to assault the daughter of a United States Special Ops commander, and you did it on my land." Karen's eyes darted between the soldiers and the helicopter like she was trying to wake up from a dream. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, just a trembling gasp as one of the armed men raised his hand toward me. "Commander, perimeter's secure. Awaiting your command." I nodded once, calmly. "Check the property line. Make sure she didn't plant anything else." Karen stumbled backward. Wait, you don't understand. I was protecting the neighborhood. That little girl could have fallen into the well. I was trying to save her." "Save her?" I snapped, pointing to my daughter's bruised wrist. "You nearly threw her in." She looked around for backup, but there was no one. Her voice cracked. "This isn't legal. This is harassment. I'll have your badge, your house, your—" "Funny thing," I cut her off, walking forward slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel. "You said I bought this house illegally." "Exactly," she barked, desperate now. "Your name's not even on the HOA registry. You're not in the system. I filed the paperwork myself." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a leather folder. Not a wallet. Not an ID. It was a federal land deed sealed and signed years before Karen had even moved into the neighborhood. "You didn't check the federal registry," I said, flipping it open and handing it to the nearest soldier. "This property was granted to me after my 4th deployment. It's protected land, private, untouchable by any HOA." Karen's face went pale. Her mouth twitched like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. "You just trespassed," I said quietly. "Assaulted a child, filed false property claims, and impersonated an official authority." The soldier beside me smirked. "We got enough here to charge her in 3 counties. Karen suddenly turned and bolted, but she didn't get far. One soldier stepped into her path, flipping her to the ground with a clean move that showed he'd done this 100 times. She hit the grass hard, screaming like a child herself now. "This is America," she shouted, kicking wildly. "I have rights." I looked down at her, holding my daughter close. "Exactly. And so do we." The cuffs clicked tight around her wrists as Karen kept thrashing, still yelling nonsense like she thought she was in charge. "You can't arrest me. I'm the head of this neighborhood," she cried, her voice rising to a shriek. "I have power here." The soldier didn't flinch. "Ma'am, the only thing you're the head of is a lawsuit." My daughter buried her face in my chest, still shaking. I ran a hand gently down her back, whispering, "You're safe now, baby. She won't ever touch you again." Karen kept twisting on the ground like a fish out of water. "This is abuse. I was just enforcing the rules. He doesn't belong here. He's lying. That's a fake deed." I stepped closer, kneeling beside her with calm that unnerved her more than yelling ever could. "Let me explain something real slow," I said. "This land isn't just mine. It was awarded to me by the Department of Defense. For service, you couldn't imagine. And that little house you tried to evict me from, I built it with my own hands. Every brick, every screw, every inch." Her eyes widened. No, you're making this up." "I don't need to make anything up. You made it easy when you taped that fake HOA violation to my door this morning," I said, pulling out my phone. With one tap, the screen showed clear video of her placing a forged notice with a bogus signature and a made-up fine. "You walked right into a federal setup, Karen. Smile. You're not just on camera. You're on about 8. You trapped me," she whispered, now trembling for a very different reason. "No," I said, standing tall. "You trapped yourself. The moment you thought you could mess with my family and walk away clean." Just then, a black SUV rolled up the driveway. The man who stepped out wore a gray suit and a hard expression. Karen's face twisted in confused recognition. "William, what are you doing here?" she stammered. The man didn't answer her. He walked straight to me and extended a hand. "Commander, I'm Agent Monroe, DOJ. We've been watching her for a while. Fraud, power abuse, threatening families, impersonating law enforcement. She's done." Karen's jaw dropped. "Wait, you were spying on me?" He nodded. "You made it easy." Karen's body went limp. The fight drained out of her like water down a sink. She stared at Agent Monroe like he was a ghost, her lips trembling as she whispered, "You were at the last HOA meeting." He nodded. "Undercover. You were using HOA authority to extort money, threaten families, and file illegal liens. You targeted immigrants, veterans, single parents, all under the fake promise of keeping the neighborhood clean." I was protecting the community," she screamed. "It's people like him that bring trouble." Agent Monroe didn't even blink. "You filed a false child endangerment report last month on a woman for letting her kid ride a tricycle on the sidewalk. You called the cops on a Navy vet because his flagpole was too tall. You threatened to tow a disabled man's van because it didn't match your idea of aesthetic. You've been a terrorist in a sweater vest." Karen's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. I stepped forward slowly. "You want to know the real twist?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my daughter's drawing, the one she made, the day we moved in. It was of our home, with a big tree, a sun, and 3 smiling stick figures, me, her, and our dog. She had taped it to the front door with a little note, "Home sweet home." "You tore this down," I said. "Crushed it in your hand and said we didn't belong." Karen looked away, ashamed, or just defeated. "But the funny thing is," I continued, voice steady, "this neighborhood was my assignment before I even moved in. This wasn't just a home. It was an operation. We were gathering proof and you gave us everything." Monroe leaned in closer to her. "And now, you're not just facing HOA violations. You're looking at federal time, multiple charges, and every family you threatened, they'll finally sleep in peace." The soldiers lifted her to her feet. She didn't resist anymore. As they led her to the SUV, she looked back one last time, not with hatred now, but with fear. Real, deep, swallowing fear. My daughter, now calm in my arms, looked up at me and whispered, "Daddy, is the bad lady gone?" I kissed her forehead gently. "She's gone, sweetheart, and she's not coming back." As the SUV doors shut behind her with a heavy thud, I could finally breathe. Not just in relief, but with the weight of months lifting off my chest. For too long, Karen had been a shadow over this neighborhood, smiling at barbecues, waving at cameras while quietly crushing families behind closed doors. But now, the wolf had been dragged out from under the sheep's clothing. Agent Monroe turned to me. "We've been watching her for nearly a year. We needed someone she'd underestimate. Someone she'd feel bold enough to provoke." I gave a small, tired smile. "You picked me because of the kid, didn't you?" Monroe nodded. "No one plays innocent better than someone willing to hurt a child." I held my daughter closer. "She nearly succeeded." "But she didn't," he replied firmly. "Because you stayed in control. You let her hang herself with her own rope." Just then, one of the neighbors cautiously stepped onto their porch. Then another, and another. Within minutes, a small group had gathered near the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold. Some held phones, others just watched with wide eyes and heavy silence. One older man, Mr. Leon, a retired schoolteacher who Karen had once tried to evict for having wind chimes, stepped forward. "Is it true?" he asked. "She's finally gone?" I nodded. For good. A slow cheer began to rise. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet relief that slowly grew into claps and thankful smiles. One woman hugged her son tightly. A teenage boy gave me a salute. Mr. Leon looked like he might cry. "She told us no one could stop her," he said softly. "We believed her." I looked around at the faces. Some scared, some grateful. All of them tired of living under someone else's thumb. "Well," I said, stepping forward, "she was wrong." And then, for the first time since moving here, it felt like home. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the air turned cool, I sat on the porch with my daughter curled up beside me, finally asleep. She was holding on to her stuffed bear like it was a lifeline, and for the first time in weeks there were no HOA notices taped to our door, no threats, no watching eyes from across the street. Just quiet, until my phone buzzed. It was a text from Monroe. She flipped. She's naming others. I stared at the screen. For a second longer than I should have, it made sense. Karen was never acting alone. Someone was helping her forge documents, fake HOA votes, create backdated violation records. It was all a bigger operation than anyone suspected. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was a business. I tapped Monroe's message and replied, "Let me know when the rest are ready to fall." I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked out at the houses across the street. Funny how perfect everything seemed. Trimmed lawns, white fences, porch lights glowing like nothing had ever gone wrong. But behind those perfect walls were people who'd been living in fear. Fear of fines, fear of losing their homes, fear of standing up to the Karen Council, as Monroe called it in his report. Now the mask was cracking. A car pulled into the driveway next door. It was Mrs. Alvarez, the woman who Karen had threatened, with deportation over a misplaced recycling bin. She stepped out, holding her toddler in one arm and a grocery bag in the other. When she saw me, she paused and then smiled. A real one. "Thank you," she said softly, "for fighting back." I nodded. It wasn't just for me. As she went inside, I thought about how Karen had tried to turn this whole neighborhood into her playground, and how close she came to succeeding. But she made one mistake. She picked the wrong house. The next morning, I woke up to something strange. Laughter. Kids playing. Doors opening instead of slamming shut. For the first time since I'd moved in, the neighborhood felt alive. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, my daughter still asleep upstairs. A few neighbors were gathered near the cul-de-sac, pulling weeds together, fixing a broken mailbox, chatting like real people, like a community. No one was looking over their shoulder for a letter with a made-up fine or a notice telling them their grass was non-compliant. Then I noticed the sign. Someone had taken down the old faded HOA community board and replaced it with a plain wooden plaque that read, "This land belongs to its people, not its fear." I didn't know who did it, but I didn't need to. Monroe called later that afternoon. His tone was calm but serious. "She's not just naming names," he said. "She's got bank records, voice memos, even emails. She was part of something bigger, targeting veterans, widows, low-income buyers, forcing them out, flipping the homes for profit through shell companies tied to board members." I clenched my jaw. "How many?" "Dozens, maybe more. And the rest of the HOA board? Already under investigation. Some have lawyered up, others disappeared." I looked out at the street, watching a group of kids ride their bikes where Karen once screamed at them for touching the sidewalk. "Tell me when you need me. We might need your testimony, but you've already done the hardest part." I didn't answer right away. My eyes landed on the small well at the back of my property, now sealed, with a warning sign and camera, posted. The same well Karen had used to try and teach me a lesson. The same one she nearly threw my daughter into like it was nothing. "You know," I finally said, "she thought the well would be the end of it." Monroe was quiet for a beat, and it ended up being the beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of the city courthouse in a clean shirt and boots still dusty from working on the house. My daughter held my hand tightly, her eyes scanning the reporters and flashing cameras. She didn't understand everything, but she knew the bad woman wasn't coming back. Inside, Karen sat at the defendant's table, hair tied back, suit too. Big for her frame, her confidence stripped down to silence. She didn't look at me, not once. The judge read the charges: fraud, impersonating a government official, filing false police reports, conspiracy, child endangerment. The list went on. Each word felt like a brick being lifted from my chest. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front with my daughter beside me. The judge motioned for someone to escort her out, but I shook my head gently. "She stays. She needs to hear this." The room fell silent. "You see me and think I'm just a dad who got lucky," I began. "But what you didn't know, Karen, is that I fought for every inch of the ground I stand on. Overseas, at home, in court, in war zones, and now, in a suburban neighborhood." A few people behind me nodded. I continued. "You didn't just cross a line. You built your entire life on pushing people past theirs. You targeted the quiet ones, the ones who didn't have backup. But I wasn't just your neighbor. I was your test. And you failed." Karen blinked fast, trying to hold back tears. For once, she didn't have a snarky response. I looked toward the jury. She didn't just throw my daughter in a well. She threw every law, every moral, every ounce of decency into it too. She wanted to break us. And now I ask you, don't let her walk out thinking she can do this to someone else. The courtroom stayed quiet even after I finished. Not a single cough. Just the weight of every truth finally said out loud. Hours later, the verdict came, and guilty on all counts. As Karen was led away, her eyes darted back to me one last time, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was watching my daughter skip down the courthouse steps, free, smiling, finally safe. I bent down beside her and said, "You know what today means?" She grinned. "What?" "It means this land is ours, and no one, not even the loudest bully in the room, gets to take it from us." She hugged me tight. "You're like a superhero, Daddy." I smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm just a dad who finally got to fight back. And sometimes, that's more powerful than any cape." The end.